Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining another episode of Crime Writers of Canada's podcast. Typically, I talk to authors but today we're doing something different for the first time ever. We are going to be talking to a co-founder of a Canadian book publisher. Jack David, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Eric.
I couldn't find a lot about you. Most every time I put in Jack David, it says ECW. So we're going to talk about ECW. ECW Press is a Canadian book publisher located in Toronto, Ontario. It was founded by Jack David and Robert Lecker in 1974 as a Canadian literary magazine named Essays on Canadian Writing. They started publishing trade and scholarly books in 1979. ECW Press publishes a range of books in fiction, nonfiction, poetry, sport, and pop culture. Publishers Weekly listed ECW Press as one of the fastest growing and most diversified independent publishers in North America. ECW has published over 2,000 books distributed throughout the English speaking world and translated into dozens of languages. So, as we said, ECW originally stood for Essays on Canadian Writing, but according to your websites, it's evolved into many different abbreviations. Currently, you're saying that it's entertainment, culture, and writing. What do those words mean to you?
It means that somebody didn't like essays on Canadian writing. So one of our publicists or marketing people changed it. And that was fine. And it could be called energy and corporations and werewolves. I don't care, whatever it's called. It's it appears that we've been having that discussion about branding a company. And the problem with branding a company is that you could ask five people on the street to name five publishing companies, and they couldn't. You could ask them probably at a banquet for crime writers, and they would get to seven or eight. There's 120 English Canadian trade publishers in Canada. 120 more. So how do you brand a name like that? And then we have another trouble, which is that we publish poetry, but we publish wrestling books. We publish novels, but we publish baseball books. We're not a brand. We're a publisher who likes books. And very quickly, the reason for that is that we allow our acquisition editors the ability to sign up what they think is good, is great. And that means everybody's got different tastes. And as the acquisition editors change, the nature of our books changes.
Well, let's talk about sort of acquisitions. I get a lot of questions, so you guys must get more about what it takes for a new writer to become a published writer. You're the person who eventually makes that decision for every book that you publish. Um,
Not true.
some you just greenlight without looking?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, in your eyes, then, when a book comes across your table,
Yep.
how do you feel or what does it take to be a good story?
They we've recently done a rough count. We think we get 4 or 5 thousand submissions a year. Of those, we publish about 50 books new, but half of those are repeat customers, like a mystery author who's got another book. I'm just looking at a new Anne Emery book, for example. And of those 25, some are from friends or people who know us or knew the writer. So you're down to maybe of books that are out of the blue, you're down to maybe five or seven or eight a year out of those 50. Well, let's say it's five out of 5,000. What are your odds? So how do you get published? You have to do something. I'll give you an example of a book, two books I'm just about to sign up, not in the mystery category, one sort of. It's by a guy who was the fingerprinting forensics expert at the OPP, Ontario Provincial Police. So he became the superintendent of fingerprinting and did it for about 25 years. And the advances in fingerprinting were enormous. And his own personal story is pretty interesting. And if you were a crime writer and you wanted to work fingerprinting into the story somehow, you would ultimately come to this book. I have no idea who this guy is. I read the title, I read on, he guy could write, he had a story, blah, blah, blah. We signed him up. How does that happen? You have to have in nonfiction a really good premise, and you have to be a good writer. In fiction, if we're talking about mysteries, you have to be more than, and here I'll condemn a couple groups of people. You you have to be not an ex public school librarian, and you have to be not an ex high school English teacher, because I've never found anything from those people who I see a lot of that stands out. The writing is flat and not anywhere near the kind of quality that you would expect, word to word, sentence to sentence, paragraph to paragraph, in terms of the concept. There's always two cops. One's a guy, one's a girl. They have different names. They come from different backgrounds. By paragraph two, I'm out. I'm done. But I look at every one. I look at every single mystery submission that we get. How do you get my attention? I've got to see, oh, I've got to see a sentence that I haven't seen before.
Mm.
And then I've got to see another sentence that I haven't seen before. And I've got to see a word use that I haven't seen recently. That's how does that happen? I don't know. It's a miracle.
How about how polished does it have to be? Like, should they
No,
have
I don't care.
hired their own editors
No.
before
I
publish?
I published a guy years ago who wrote in pencil
Oh,
and he
okay, you're an
couldn't use
anomaly.
he couldn't use a computer. And I thought, well, I'll give it 15 seconds. And we published four books by him. I mean, we had to clean them up. We had to do stuff, but the writing was there.
What about trends then? So if like right now, what's it? Romantic sci-fi, super popular, right? Are you going to search
Yeah,
out that trend, or does that not matter to you?
we don't follow the trends, but we back off when we see that the books that we like aren't selling properly, whatever that means. So I like blood and guts. I like murders. I like people's heads being cut off and fingers showing up. I like all that stuff. I don't know what the percent is, but let's say 70% of readers of mysteries are female and of a certain age. And they
Mhm.
don't like fingers showing up in their soup. So, so I then said, "Oh God, I don't think I can do a cozy, but if I can find a really well written cozy, I can do it." And so I've kind of put my toe into that territory. I'm still attached to my foot, as it turns out. The writing's got to be superior in cozies or blood and guts or whatever.
Mhm. What about social media? Now, I hear this a lot from my friends who try to get published, and they're told the advice they're given is build their social media empire. They should have like 1 million followers on Instagram. Do you look at that? Is that important to you? Because this
No,
is their ability to market themselves.
it's important in the author's mind, but it's not very important to the publisher because there are how many? Well, it must be a million blogs out there and social media sites, and everybody's got 1,000 people who follow them, and it really doesn't matter. It matters only in terms of us getting responses online that we can then use as back cover copy or as promo copy, and even that doesn't matter. It would matter if we said on the back cover of a new mystery, James Lee Burke thinks this is the best book he's read since Elmore Leonard. And, and then he signs his name, James Lee Burke. That would matter. Other than that, not much.
All right, last how important question. What about setting? Now, a lot of a lot of American publishers want American books, and they wouldn't print a story that was published in, or sorry, that was set in Canada. Do you look for stories that are set in Canada? Does that score brownie points for you?
No, we just did a pretty good mystery, mostly set in Italy,
Mhm.
two actually, and we've had them a lot set in the U.S. But often the U.S. writers are trying to figure out how to make the U.S. place distinctive. So if it's L.A. or New York or Miami, you haven't got a shot. But if it's Decatur, Illinois, then you pay attention because you don't know anything about Decatur, Illinois. So I'm of my preference is to publish Canadian authors, number one.
Mhm.
Occasionally we've tried others, but it's almost probably 95% Canadian authors. And then what are they writing about? Are they writing about a small farm in northern Saskatchewan? Bring it on.
Excellent. Well, one of the people that you recently published that was set in Italy was William Woodholmes, 30 Feet Under. I just interviewed him recently. He was 2, 3 years ago a shortlisted for the best unpublished crime novel manuscript written by an unpublished author from Crime Writers of Canada, which ECW sponsors. We appreciate the fact that you sponsor it, but why do you sponsor this category?
We do it because there has to be an opportunity for people to submit a manuscript, get it read, maybe get it shortlisted, and give them just that extra push of confidence.
Excellent, thank you. Last question then. If I was a high school student and you were talking to me in a creative writing class, what advice would you give a high school student wanting to be a writer today?
There's a lot of advice out there. I recommend the Stephen King on Writing book as a good, short, direct version of what to do. And then I recommend not paying attention to anything that anybody else says and live by the motto, which is nobody knows anything, the William Goldman phrase from Hollywood, because nobody knows anything. We don't know if we were a movie producer, how would we know which movie was going to work? If we were a A&R guy at a recording studio, how would we know what song is going to work? It's something to do with instincts and gut and experience. And and I often, after sending out a what I think is a fairly friendly rejection, I get a letter back and it says, "Well, what would I do to get this published? Should I change the character? Should I alter the place? Should I da da da? What?" I said, "Write another book. Just keep writing." And maybe you've got it, and maybe you don't. And maybe you're going to find an editor out there who's sympathetic to you. But you've got to be able to do research and you've got to be able to write a good letter. And then maybe you've got a shot at hitting that spot. If you try to self-publish, my recommendation is don't do it because you're going to end up with 700 books in your basement.
Well, Jack, it was a pleasure talking to you. I hope I asked all the questions that my aspiring writers wanted to ask you, and it was a pleasure for me. Like I had to narrow it down, like how many questions I'm going to ask you. So, thank you so much for taking the time, Jack.
Thanks, Eric.